from those calories and nutrients that you get. So for someone with Parkinson's disease, that's a big thing. We want you to feel at your strongest and hopefully at a good energy level. There are some things with some symptoms that come along with Parkinson's that we can tweak what someone's eating to possibly help with those symptoms. And then also with Parkinson's, some of you may be aware, but we'll talk more about this into the talk, but some of the medications that you may be taking for Parkinson's can be affected by what you eat. So we'll go over that as well. But I want to start out with, like, I love using the phrase food is our fuel. Like, that is what's going to keep our bodies running, and good nutrition is going to keep our bodies running more efficiently. Whereas if we're filling up with maybe poor sources of nutrition, we might be our tank might not be filling quite up to the top. So thinking about food is what's going to fill up our gas tank each and every day. Okay, so to start out with, I wanted just to throw out our map of Omaha. It sounded like some of us are from the Omaha area. Some of us are from Lincoln, it sounds like. So hopefully you guys have probably driven through the streets of Omaha. But for someone who's not familiar with Omaha, you look at a map, or if you go to a new city, if you're vacationing, you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many streets and so many, the interstates and main roads. Like, how do we even go about getting to where we need to go? And unfortunately, with Google Maps and GPS, that isn't quite an issue these days. But think about, like, if back to the days when we used to read we used to read paper maps to get to places. How are we going to get to where we need to go? So I wanted to use like a map of Omaha as part of our talk today to think about, when we think about Omaha as a city, how can we compare that to nutrition for ourselves? So with Parkinson's, there's so many questions that come up, like I mentioned before. These are just some of them, like, what should I be eating, what I shouldn't be eating? Should I have more carbohydrates? Should I have more protein, or should I have less of those things? Is there a diet I should follow? Should I go gluten-free or should I go dairy-free? There's so many questions out there. So I want to clear up some of the confusion today. So to just take things back to the basics just for a minute here, when we think about our food and what's in our diet, we have a few main components. So we have things called our macronutrients, which are those larger nutrients we get more of on a daily basis. And then when we have things that are called micronutrients that we get in smaller quantities, but still on a regular basis, generally every day. So those main nutrients that make up our diet are going to be those first three: our carbohydrates, our protein, and our fat. So those are found in most foods that we eat. We'll go into each of those here in a minute. But then under that would be some of the smaller nutrients that we get smaller quantities of. That would be our vitamins and our minerals. And then there's also things we refer to as phytonutrients. So I'll explain more of that in a minute, but that is actually the area that's being researched more, particularly in Parkinson's disease, of these phytonutrients that are being shown to be helpful. And then we have actually like water. We consider that something that makes up our diet. Not only do we drink water, but foods also have water in it. If you think about like your fruits and vegetables, anywhere from like 3/4 to 90% of our fruit or vegetable sometimes is water. So we do get some hydration from those types of things too. So we'll break it down into each of these nutrients here going forward. So I'm going to start with carbohydrates. So when I think of Omaha, I guess maybe I should explain. So I grew up in a town about an hour west of Omaha, Prague, Nebraska. Maybe some of you have been through there. So it was a teeny tiny small town. There's about 300 people that live there. So coming to Omaha to finish up my schooling and then to work here, I had to learn the lay of the land. Omaha wasn't a place we went to too often growing up. But when I think of Omaha, I think of like Interstate 80 as one of our main roads that goes through Omaha. So to compare that to one of our main nutrients in our diet, that would be carbohydrates. That's what most of our calories come from, or the majority of our calories come from carbohydrates. And there's quite a few foods that have carbohydrates in them. The thing is, we have in each food group, we have healthier choices of that nutrient, then we also have less healthy choices of that particular food group. So within carbohydrates, think about our like grains and starches. So that's going to be like our breads and our rolls and our rice, but whole grains have some beneficial nutrients. And then we have fruits and vegetables that have carbohydrates in them. And then like things like beans or legumes. So if anyone eats, beans or lentils, that would have carbohydrates. And then some milk products. So like milk and yogurt are some probably two of the highest carbohydrate type foods in that dairy food group. So those are some good, or those are some types of foods where you get some good sources of carbohydrates. And then below, I've listed maybe some of our less healthy carbohydrate sources. So some of our processed grains, things like white bread or white rice, or like a standard hamburger or hot dog bun that's made with white flour would be one of those processed or refined carbohydrates. And then like things that are sugary foods. So our sweets like cookies and brownies and cake and things like that, as well as some of our beverages. So soda or like lemonade or juice, those are going to have a higher sugar source. So all these foods on this page are carbohydrates. But I want to dive in then, like, what are carbohydrates and which ones should we be choosing more often? So like I said, carbohydrates are our main source of energy. Like about half of our calories do come from carbohydrates in a typical diet. But carbohydrates, they do good things for us too. They provide us with a good source of energy. We can get instant sources of energy, or we can get more prolonged sources of energy that stick with us longer. Or we can use our body can use carbohydrates to basically build up this energy reserve. So in the event that we need some energy, it can go to those stores to pull those nutrients from to keep functioning well. Carbohydrates supply energy to our brain, to our cells to do all the little processes it needs to do, and then our tissues and our organs. So most of our body is going to be using carbohydrates for energy. So some of our more important carbohydrates are going to be some of these things listed here. So I want to touch on grains first. There's often a lot of confusion in that area. What's a good grain to choose? So when I refer to whole grains, that's going to be a food that uses literally the whole grain from that product. So if it's a wheat product, it's going to have like that whole wheat kernel included in it. Whereas if we had, so like bread, for example, if we had white bread, that's going to, they're going to remove some of the layers of the grain, and then we lose some of the good nutrients in it. We lose some fiber from it. We can lose some B vitamins from it. We can lose some iron from it just by them taking away the outside parts of the grain. So anything that you can choose that's whole grain is going to be an excellent source. So we have different breads that are whole grain or whole wheat. We have pastas nowadays that are made with whole wheat. You can even buy tortillas that are whole grain or whole wheat tortillas. When it comes to rice, brown rice or even wild rice is a whole grain, so more of that colorful type of rice. Quinoa is another one that's grown some popularity in the last 5 to 10 years that would be more of that whole grain. Even oatmeal. So if anybody is an oatmeal eater in the morning, that's actually my go-to breakfast most mornings is a bowl of oatmeal. So you can get a whole grain serving that way. And then popcorn, actually like a kernel of popcorn, you know, if you have like a stir crazy or an air popper where you're doing it yourself, you know that you're starting with that whole grain, that whole kernel, and which then pops into our popcorn. So that would actually still be considered a whole grain. So whole grains are excellent sources of carbohydrates. Legumes and beans are as well. This is one area when I visit with a lot of people, a lot of people don't eat a lot of beans. Probably the most common ones I'll hear is like maybe chili beans if they're having chili, or maybe some black beans or pinto beans if they're doing, Mexican type food or burritos or going to Qdoba or Chipotle, they might get some beans there. But this is one area I actually like to encourage people to explore more, because not only are they a good source of carbohydrate, they have a great source of fiber, and they're actually high in iron, which is sometimes a nutrient we don't get enough of, or people have iron deficiency sometimes, I've seen with some of my Parkinson's patients. So beans are kind of a fun area if you're looking for something new to try and explore, would be looking for some recipes that have beans. Lentils also fall within that same food group too. So that's another one that is fun to experiment with. And then we go into fruits and vegetables. This is one I can't emphasize enough. We all know, or most of us know, or in the back of our minds, we're like, I should eat more fruits and vegetables. We know they're good for us, or have that concept. But in Parkinson's disease, this is one, or these two food groups, the fruits and the vegetables, are one that's been shown to be more brain protective. So in those fruits and vegetables, this is where we find some of our important vitamins and minerals, and then some of those phytonutrients, or those helpful nutrients I was talking about before. So getting plenty of fruits and vegetables, I can't emphasize enough. So even, trying to have a couple fruit servings a day, and when it comes to vegetables, at least 2 or 3 servings of vegetables would help you get a good intake. And then, other carbohydrates, like I mentioned, would include milk, and then yogurt. So if you think about milk and yogurt, they contain lactose. So that's what actually allows those two foods to fall into the carbohydrate group, because lactose is a natural sugar. Okay, so moving on, we drove across Interstate 80 with our carbohydrates, and now we're gonna take a loop up on 480, or Highway 75. So heading on our second interstate system within the Omaha area is going to be protein. So that's one of our next important food groups to include. So I kind of did the same thing here. Some of those green type of foods are some healthier choices of protein. And then those red ones, they contain protein, but I would throw them into the group of foods that are to be had in moderation, or to have less often, or to watch how much you have at a time. So some good sources of protein are lean meats, or fish. And then you'll see some overlap. So we already talked about beans. So they're one of those foods that have both protein and carbohydrates in them. Yogurt is another example. It has protein and carbohydrates. And then eggs would be another good source of protein. So protein is one of those nutrients. We probably get about 1/4 of our calories from protein on average. But one of the key things that protein does is it helps our muscle mass. So when we eat protein, there's all these different things called amino acids that we're consuming. And those amino acids then go to our muscles and are basically like the building blocks and energy sources for our muscles. Not only does it help our muscles, it also helps our bones, our cartilage, our skin, and even our blood does require protein to make red blood cells and things like that. It also makes enzymes and hormones and other like natural chemicals that our body needs. So this is a pretty robust nutrient. Its main uses for muscles, but it does a lot of other things too. So with Parkinson's, that's, one thing as I'm working with people is I might visit with someone who has felt like they've been losing some muscle mass. And so one of the nutrients we'll take a deeper dive in would be their protein intake. Are they getting enough protein in their diet? So protein is another one of those top nutrients. I listed out, in further detail, some of our meats and seafood or fish are good sources of protein. Any type of seafood, whether it's like a fish fillet type piece, or tuna, shrimp, scallops, lobster, anything like that. Mentioned the eggs earlier. Dairy, we could expand a little bit more compared to what the carbohydrate list showed. So in addition to milk and yogurt, cheese and cottage cheese are both good sources of protein. Tofu, that's another type of food not a lot of people eat, but does contain a good source of protein. Nuts and seeds, so any type of nut, peanuts, almonds, cashews, walnuts, and then seeds as well. So sunflower seeds, and then chia seeds, flax seeds. Those are a little bit of two unique types of seeds, the chia and flax seeds, but do contain some protein. And then quinoa as well. So I have a little asterisk by it because quinoa is just a little fun fact. Technically is a seed, even though we also lump it into that whole grain category. It actually falls or aligns more with a seed, but we cook it and eat it more like a starch or a carbohydrate side would be. But quinoa surprisingly has a high protein content. And then, our beans and legumes. So just like we talked about before, any type of bean that you would have, or lentils, or that hummus, which is a dip made from beans, would also have a good protein source. Okay, so the one thing though, some of you might be thinking, wait, protein with Parkinson's, there's something up with that. So I'm going to make us take a little stop here to talk about the medication and food interaction when it comes to protein that's specific for people who have Parkinson's if they're taking a certain type of medication. So one of the common medications used is carbidopa-levodopa, or the brand name would be like Cinnamate or Parcopa or Rytari. So there is a known interaction that can occur when someone eats a high protein food and takes their carbidopa-levodopa at the same time. So the levodopa component of that medication actually fights against the amino acids in our protein, and they're basically fighting for absorption. So if we have amino acids that are being absorbed instead of our levodopa being absorbed, then you might find that the medication doesn't work as well if you ate, or if you took the medication when you have a protein food at the same time. So, and then another type of interaction that can occur with carbidopa-levodopa is actually iron supplements. So avoiding taking iron supplements, and then even multivitamins, especially if your multivitamin would contain iron, can also decrease how well that medication is going to work for you. So sometimes, I'll be visiting with people about how can we modify what you eat and the timing of your medications to make sure that your meds are going to work to the best that they can, because we don't want the things that you're eating to affect how well that med is going to work. Otherwise, you might be taking the med for really no good benefit. So our recommendations, our simple recommendations, is to try and take your carbidopa-levodopa 30 minutes before a meal that would have protein in it, or waiting 60 minutes after a meal that has protein. And then when it comes to iron supplements and a multivitamin, if you can space that 2 hours apart from the carbidopa, levodopa, that also allows for best absorption and best use of the medication. So another thing though is, especially when someone starts carbidopa, levodopa, if anyone, either if you've been on it for a while or if you're newly started on it, or think back to when you started on it, a common side effect is feeling nauseous or an upset stomach, unfortunately. So to help combat that, while still allowing that medication to hopefully help with your Parkinson's symptoms, we'll tell people to take it with a carbohydrate, even if it's a couple crackers or a piece of bread or toast or a piece of fruit, just to help settle the stomach. That way you have food in your stomach instead of taking the medication on a completely empty stomach. So hopefully that all makes sense. I would say the takeaways are, if you can time your carbidopa, levodopa to taking it 30 minutes before a meal or waiting 60 minutes after, you might find that the medication works better. And then if you notice though, if you're taking it on an empty stomach that you feel nauseous or kind of feel queasy, to try taking it with a small carbohydrate source. Okay, now we're getting back on the interstate system here in Omaha. So we went up Interstate 80, we went over on Interstate 80, 480, and now we're coming back over to 680 to make our loop around the Omaha interstate system. So our third most important nutrient is fat. So once again, I've listed out some of our healthier choices of fats and then some of our less healthy choices. So olive oil, that is one that's also been studied or evaluated in Parkinson's to be a helpful oil to use. Nuts and seeds also have fats in it, as well as the protein. So you'll see a lot of these foods do overlap. And like fish has both protein and it has healthy fats in it. And then avocados, that's another one that is a good source of fat. On the right side of the screen in the red color is going to be more of those foods that have saturated fats. So if you've heard of saturated fats before, those are fats that are solid at room temperature is a good way to think about it. Or often saturated fats do come from animal sources. So like our butter, or they occur naturally in some of our meats, or think about fat on the edge of a steak or fat that cooks up in your ground beef. That would be more of a saturated fat. Or like fried foods, you get some of those saturated fats. Actually, turkey shouldn't be on this screen. I just realized you can ignore that one. One should be crossed off. Okay, so yeah, what does fat do for us? Once again, fat is about 1/4 of our calories, similar to protein, but there are healthy fats in our diet. So it used to be 20 or 30 years ago, the trend was that all fat was bad. Most of you probably remember that health trend, but we've learned more through lots of different research studies and all different health conditions that there are healthy fats that are actually beneficial. And this has also been seen in Parkinson's then too, that these unsaturated fats, so we have two main types of those. You might see polyunsaturated fats, or you might see monounsaturated fats. Those two are considered healthy fat sources. The brain really likes these types of fats. It promotes good brain health. It can also lower cholesterol levels. And overall, those healthy fats can have what we call an anti-inflammatory effect. So it can reduce inflammation. So then our less healthy fats are going to be those saturated fats and trans fats. So those are more of those solid type fats, like our butters and creams and lard and those types of things. So good sources of fat are listed here next. So fish have those good sources of fat. Often I'll recommend to someone, if you can incorporate one to two servings of fish or seafood a week, that you'll get some good fat sources that way. Your oils, so extra virgin olive oil, or a newer one has been avocado oil. That would also contain those healthy fats. Avocados in general, or like a guacamole dip, would have healthy fats. And then our nuts and seeds. So once again, here we see our nuts and seeds. They were on our protein list, but they're also on our fat list too. But these contain some good healthy fat sources. So you'll see this list, probably out of all of them, is the shortest or fewer options. But I would encourage you to try to get, 1 or 2 healthy fats a day. So maybe in the morning you have toast, whole grain toast with peanut butter. You'll get a healthy fat there. And then maybe in the evening you're making like a stir fry, or you're sauteing something in the pan, or roasting vegetables, and you drizzle some olive oil on there. There you'd get 2 healthy fat sources. Or, like sandwiches. So avocado slices can always go on sandwiches, or you can even use guacamole as a spread for sandwiches. If you picked out your main entree as a fish source, you'll get a healthy fat that way. And then you guys will see at the end there, that last choice is dark chocolate. So that dark chocolate does have some beneficial nutrients in it besides just its fat source. It does have some antioxidant-like properties. So if you want a sweet treat, I would encourage you to look for different dark chocolate options, even if it's like the little like Dove dark chocolates, or like a bar of dark chocolate that you break a piece or 2 off of and have that for a treat. That would be actually a pretty nutritious choice. Okay, so we hit up our interstates, and now I decided that Dodge Street is one of our other main roads that we'll drive on Lincoln. So I decided that our next most important nutrient would be water. And that is something I can't emphasize enough. A lot of people I talk to are drinking very minimal water, or their hydration is pretty low. So Dodge Street, one of our other main streets, is going to be water here today. So whether it's water or flavored waters, or even decaffeinated beverages, would be a hydrating source. Down there at the bottom, then, the ones highlighted in red are going to be, they're fluids, but they're fluids that might be a little bit less healthy depending on what our goal is. So soda and diet soda have had some links to being less helpful in Parkinson's. And then some sugary drinks like our lemonade and juice, and even some sports drinks, depending on the type, can be pretty high in sugar, or just a simple sugar. So yeah, why do we even need water? Our body, surprisingly, more than half of it is water. Depending on the person, it can be anywhere from like 50 or 60% up to like 70 to 75% of our body. So even our body weight is composed of water. Water helps maintain our balance of our body's fluids. We need water to help our bloodstream to deliver oxygen through it. Our skin actually relies a lot on water and hydration, especially if you're experiencing dry skin. Sometimes that is just a result of not drinking enough water. Water helps regulate our body temperature. We need it for digestion. So another thing in Parkinson's that can be an issue is constipation. So drinking extra water can help with regulating bowel movements too. Because if you think about, our food and our waste needs to go through our bowels, but if there's not much liquid to go with it, it can move much slower. So extra hydration can help with bowel movements. A lot of us, have heard about, our doctors maybe have mentioned to us, drinking more water can bring your blood pressure up, especially if someone experiences a lower blood pressure. So extra water can help with that. And then our kidneys do so much for us. And by drinking more water, we're filtering more water through them to help wash out some of those waste products that occur on a daily basis in our body. So lots and lots of things that water does for us. And then the next groupings of foods are those smaller nutrients that I mentioned at the very beginning. Our vitamins, our minerals, and what we call phytonutrients. So I'll explain a little bit more about these here then. So think about, we've gone on, I would say, our main roads. We've gone on the interstates and Dodge Street. So think about all these vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients as the side streets. So even the street that you live on, or our smaller streets, I could have labeled all of them a different vitamin or mineral or nutrient. So some of our vitamins that are helpful in Parkinson's, or ones that we want to make sure that someone has an adequate amount of, is vitamin D. So vitamin D helps with a whole variety of things, but really we think about vitamin D and Parkinson's related to your bone health. So vitamin D keeps our bones strong in addition to calcium. So that can help prevent fractures and issues with our bones. Vitamin B1, it's also called thiamine. That is one in Parkinson's too that we sometimes see people are low in. And if someone is low in vitamin B1, that can lead to quite a few problems. Oftentimes, if there's issues with our thinking or our clarity, our mental clarity, that can be a cause of a low B1 level. B12 can kind of manifest similarly, where someone is having some cognitive and thinking problems. They could be low in B12. Or sometimes we'll see too, a low B12 level can cause numbness and tingling in our fingers and our toes. And sometimes that is because someone's low in B12. So if we correct that, sometimes those things can resolve. And then like vitamin C is another one, for example, that acts more as an antioxidant, meaning it helps take away some of the bad waste products in our body, and has more of that anti-inflammatory effect. And then some other minerals. There's, calcium for our bones, and magnesium and phosphorus and potassium and sodium. We need all of these minerals. And so that's why each of those food groups, when we think about our protein, our carbohydrates, and our fat, if we get a good variety of those foods, we generally get a good variety of vitamins and minerals then. So that's why like all food groups are truly important. We don't want to cut a food group out, because then often we're setting ourselves up for missing out on some of these smaller nutrients that actually can play a pretty important role in what our body does. And then one of my favorite group or types of foods to talk about is phytonutrients. You might also hear it called phytochemicals. They're the same thing, but they are a term that describes these beneficial types of nutrients. So some examples I listed out were carotenoids. That's one people might have heard of a little bit more often or more commonly. So like beta carotene is an example that's found in carrots and squash and sweet potatoes, some more of those oranges. Another example is like lycopene, that's found in tomatoes or tomato products. So those are usually in our yellows, oranges, and reds, those carotenoids. There's anthocyanins, and those are in those blue and purple fruits and vegetables. So like eggplant, blueberries, those have anthocyanins. There's things called anthoxanthins. Those are in our white fruits and vegetables. So especially like garlic and onions, even those things, even though we think of those things as being pretty small ingredients in recipes, do contain healthy nutrients. There's resveratrol, which is in red wine and red grapes. So you might hear that, a glass of red wine has healthy properties, and that's because it contains one of these phytonutrients. And then there's glucosinolates, which is kind of in more of those, I don't know, I like to think of them as those more smelly type foods, and not in necessarily a bad way, but they just give a little bit of a different odor off of them. But Brussels sprouts or cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, those types of things, but they also have healthy properties. You'll notice that these phytonutrients are mainly found in fruits and vegetables. So that's why earlier when I was saying, if you can aim to have, at least 2 fruit servings and at least 2 or 3 vegetable servings every day, you'll get a good variety of these phytonutrients. So that's really where like the research has been going, because there's been positive correlations with people who eat higher amounts of these phytonutrients and having a slower progression of their Parkinson's disease. So there's some early research having some associations like that. Okay. So just a few things here to kind of sum up these different nutrients. One thing I just like to emphasize, sometimes I'll talk a little bit more about supplements. I'm not doing that here today, but really there is no like magic food or no magic supplement. I know we all want like a quick fix or a easy answer, but there's no one food that's like the food that's going to save us. We really need nutrients from all different types of food. Another thing just to keep in mind is more is not always better. So that also kind of falls within more of the like supplement talk, is people will think, oh, well, if like I pointed out like vitamin B1 earlier, or vitamin B12 earlier, that can be an important nutrient. Well, maybe I should just take more of it, but that is not always good. With nutrition, we usually have this like U-shaped curve. So meaning that if someone isn't eating enough of a nutrient, there's some bad things that can happen. But then also if someone has too much of a nutrient, there can be some bad things that happens. So oftentimes our food is enough to give us what we need, especially if we're getting a good variety in. But oftentimes, sometimes we think like, oh, I heard that this is good for Parkinson's, like I'll just take a supplement of it. Sometimes that's actually not helpful, because that can push us into the too much range in some instances. So really just that balance, getting foods from all your food groups on a regular basis helps give you all the nutrients that your body needs. So now that we've driven around Omaha, I want you to think about like what could I do to maybe improve my nutrition? So picking out that goal, or I like to think about, pick out your destination of where you want to go. Most of us are probably thinking today somewhere warm and sunny would be a great place to be. But think about that as your goal, like picking out a goal to help your nutrition. So I just kind of picked out a few like highlights or some starting points. So maybe it's, after our talk today, you're thinking about the different food groups, and maybe one of them stood out to you as one that, either maybe you're not getting very many sources of. So like maybe the healthy fats, you're like, oh, I'm not eating very many of those foods, or I don't have those foods every day. So maybe you focus on that. Or in a particular food group, can you make healthier choices? So maybe it's those carbohydrates. So maybe you've been buying white bread for a while, and maybe next time you go to the store, you decide, I'm going to try a whole wheat bread and see how that goes. That's already going to be an improvement to your intake. Maybe you focus on your snacks. What are you picking for your snacks, or what do you keep on hand? Maybe it's your beverages. Can you reduce your intake of sugary beverages, or drink more water, or eating out. Sometimes eating out leads to making less healthy choices. So, even just evaluating how often you eat out, or can you make substitutes to what you normally order? You know, a sandwich and fries, maybe you can do a sandwich and a salad, or a sandwich and apples or cottage cheese, depending on what other side options that they have. But one thing is, part of nutrition is, or part of the thing I hear about when nutrition is overwhelming is people think like there's so many things I should be doing, or I could change so many things. We have to pick only one thing, though, to change at a time to really be successful and make that a new habit. So I would encourage you, even if you're thinking like, oh, there's a few things I should probably do or I could do, just to pick one to start with and work on that for a few weeks until that becomes more of a habit. Even writing down what your goal is and making little tallies. Like if your goal is to drink 6 glasses of water a day, when right now you're drinking 3 glasses, make little tallies throughout the day to help monitor your progress. And have an accountability partner. So, a spouse or a family member or a friend, tell them what your goal is and talk with them about it to help you stay accountable. And another thing I encourage people is just be open to trying something new. There's a lot of things with nutrition that require us to have an open mind, especially if we're maybe trying a new recipe or trying a new product, just to have an open mind going into it. So that kind of wraps up my talk here today, or our drive through Omaha to cover some of our main nutrients in our diet. So if we have any questions, hopefully I'm giving us enough time for that here today.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna. If anybody does have questions, if you would like to go ahead and put those in chat, that would be awesome. And if you would prefer, I'm going to scroll through. If you do have a question and you would prefer to just speak out loud, just kind of wave for a moment. I know sometimes that's a little easier. So if you would like me to go ahead and unmute you, just kind of wave for a minute. I'm going to just look through everyone. Otherwise, go ahead and type those in.
Or I always like to hear when I've been talking to groups like you guys is if there's like something new you've tried or something that works well for you, or one of your favorite snacks to incorporate maybe some of these foods we talked about, you can always share something like that too.
Yeah, that would be great. If you want to throw that in your chat as well, or again, try and get my attention. I know sometimes typing is not the easiest, so definitely we'd love to unmute you. I did get one question. What about cream cheese on bagels or toast?
Okay, so cream cheese is going to be mainly a fat source that we would consume. So that's going to be one of those less healthy fats. So it could be think about either how much you put on, or maybe being open to trying something a little bit different. So maybe instead of cream cheese, or maybe you do, if you have a bagel, half of it, you make 1/2 cream cheese, the other half, you could put peanut butter on, for example. Then you'd get that healthy fat that way. So I would say cream cheese would be something to just have in moderation or a smaller quantity.
Awesome. We got another question in the chat of what about magnesium? What would be a good source of that?
Yeah, so magnesium, one of the higher sources of magnesium is actually in nuts. And actually pull this up for you. So one of I have a good resource, and this is a good resource for maybe all of you. The National Institutes of Health have a great listing of nutrients and what foods have those nutrients. So you can, if there's other things besides magnesium, but yeah, nuts are a great source. Even our beans can have magnesium in it. So besides like the iron and fiber that I pointed out, so mainly like nuts and beans are our higher sources of magnesium.
muted myself. John had a question. John, if you wanted to go ahead and ask that question, it looks like you're unmuted and you are good to go.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious, how much dark chocolate can you eat?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you say that one more time? Sorry, I missed the beginning.
How much dark chocolate can you eat and still be
The-
healthy?
Yeah. Yeah, so that is a very good question. So if someone's just trying to, eat a healthy diet and maintain a healthy weight, I think, someone might have room to have, a small piece or two of dark chocolate every day, where if that's your fun treat for the day, I think that would be appropriate. Now, if you were, maybe watching the calories that you were eating to maybe try and lose a little bit of weight, then maybe you would save that for maybe 2 or 3 times a week to have some dark chocolate. But if you have a small amount once a day, or a couple, a piece or two once a day, I think that's still a healthy amount.
Okay, thank you.
A question. How about dry navy beans as a source of protein?
Yes, I don't think I had navy beans listed, but yep, those would fall also within that, the protein group, and also our carbohydrate group. So we would share both nutrients. So yeah, navy beans are an excellent source.
How about canola oil for fat?
Yeah, so canola oil would also include some of those healthy fats. So it has a similar profile to olive oil and canola oil, or sorry, olive oil and avocado oil. So it'd still fall within that healthy fat range.
Can you give me some sources of vitamin C rather than citrus fruits? My husband can't have those.
Yeah, so for vitamin C, citrus is our most common source, but for all fruit in general is going to have vitamin C. So that would be an example. You can also look into veggies too. So like peppers, for example, especially like red peppers or yellow peppers or orange peppers have vitamin C. And even some of our greens, like broccoli, has a fair amount of vitamin C, or like Brussels sprouts or asparagus can have a little bit of vitamin C in it as well. But yeah, all fruits though contain a certain amount of vitamin C. So if citrus don't work well, but he's able to have other fruits, you'd still get a source that way.
We have 2 questions in the chat. One is, how much B1 and B12 should we have daily? So that's question 1.
Okay, you guys are gonna make me have to look. I believe with B1, so they're all different labels, or in different units. So I believe B1 is reported in milligrams. Let me look here. I used to have these memorized when we did a research study at UNMC in nutrition about 3 or 4 years ago. So I had all these memorized because we looked specifically at B1 and B12 and people's dietary intake. So I'm going to get those looked up for you as my internet loads. And then the other, let's see, I'll move on to the other question. I'll come back to the B1 and B12 for you guys. So, okay, tomato soup seems to help when I feel rotten. Any idea why? Yeah, that is a good question. So tomatoes do contain vitamin C. That would be another nutrient. Sometimes just the temperature of our foods can make a difference too. So a warm liquid or warm food might be more comforting, whereas some people might find that like a cold or room temperature food, depending on what like symptom they're specifically having, like if they're nauseous or if it's like an upset stomach. So it could be temperature related, or maybe, for you in particular, it's a more soothing type of food. Okay, then you were told to switch to butter when you had been losing weight and have regained the weight. Should I switch back to margarine? So butter does have generally more calories than margarine does. I would say in this case, to make it even a little bit of a healthier choice while still giving you a good calorie source would be is if you can use an oil or a butter that is made from an oil would be your probably top choice. So depending on if it's whether you're cooking or if it's something you wanted to spread on. If it's cooking, I would encourage you to use oils more than butter. If it's a spread you're looking for, a lot of the different brands of butters or margarine make ones from olive oil or canola oil or avocado oil. So that would probably be the top choice. Okay, so I'm going to come back to our B1 here, guys, okay? So yeah, so for a vitamin B1, we're looking at like around 1.1 or 1.2 milligrams. So to give you an idea of that, so it's kind of hard to break down, but some of our highest B1 food sources are actually foods that are fortified with B1. So like rice or breakfast cereals have B1 in it. And oftentimes if you look at the label of like a cereal or rice, they're adding like 100% of the daily value in a serving. Otherwise, it's kind of some random foods like black beans. Some seafood has B1 in it, so tuna, trout, mussels, squash, but actually a lot of our B1 does come from carbohydrates that are fortified with B1 because there's not a lot of foods. And some of that fortification was started back, within the last 100 years when there were high rates of people just in the population that would have deficiencies in certain nutrients. They were finding people weren't eating enough of a nutrient. They would start adding it to foods to make sure or help prevent deficiencies from occurring. So that's like an example of B1, why it's added to foods like those carbohydrates. And then as far as B12 goes, that's going to be found in our animal products. So meat would be a source of B12 or like products derived from animals. So milk, yogurt, eggs, those types of things would also have B1. But our optimal intake for B1 is 2.4 micrograms of B12. So you would get that if you consumed like a serving of meat. Most, a serving about 3 ounces is going to give you enough B12. Or like yogurt has about half, like a serving of yogurt or milk has about half of our daily needs for B12. Or eggs have about a quarter of our daily needs for B12. If someone isn't consuming a lot of animal products, it may be where you'd want to chat with your doctor about possibly needing or taking a B12 supplement because we usually only get our B12 from animal products. So if that's something you have less often, that is one nutrient that could need to be supplemented. When it comes to like specific vitamins and minerals though, our approach that we take with our patients is if either we're concerned about a nutrient or you might be curious about a nutrient, we like to check your blood level before we would recommend someone supplement. Because like I said, sometimes more can actually cause more issues, even though we know it's a healthy nutrient, but if you have too much of it, that can cause problems as well. So we'll often check blood levels to better guide people individually on if they need to focus on a certain nutrient.
So a lot of really good questions. Any last questions? We want to make sure you have a chance to ask anything that you're thinking about. So if you want to throw those in chat, give you one more moment. I'm going to look through, see everyone looks, raising our hands. Jenna, if anybody does have any questions or, wanted to set an appointment with you or just speak further with you, what would be a good way for them to do that?
Yeah, so a couple different options, like you can call our neurology clinic. I'll just put the phone number here in the chat.
Awesome.
So if anyone is seeing a provider at Nebraska Medicine, that's usually, it's pretty easy to get in with me, I guess. So I'll do that, or I'll include my email address, because even if it's just a question or two that you think of later, you can always email me as well. So I'll just get that in here. Okay.
Thank you.
There we go. Yep. So yeah, feel free to reach out if you have a quick question or you think of something later. Or I know everyone is in their own unique situation. So today this is a little bit of a broad view, but there's sometimes things that are very specific to what's going on with you or your current state of Parkinson's. So if you wanted to visit further about that, you can get a hold of me.
Awesome. Thanks, Joyce. That was really fun. That did make it fun. So I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody for taking time out of your Saturday, especially you, Jenna, for giving us some of your time today. If anybody has any questions, you could reach out to Jenna, you could reach out to myself, and I'd be happy to connect you with any resources that you're looking for. And again, just look out for our next support group. It will be next month in March on the second Saturday at 2:30. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and stay warm.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jenna.